Hi, everybody. Thank you to the Round Table for inviting me here today. I'm with the Network for Public Health Law. I'm at the University of Michigan School of Public Health, where my regional office is located. The Network for Public Health Law promotes and supports the use of law to solve public health problems. We receive generous support from the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation. We receive support from other foundations and organizations, and from providing fees for providing legal technical assistance. So since I'm an attorney, I've been sitting here listening to the audience and thinking, just thinking about how do attorneys perceive the world and how do the people in this audience perceive the world. First issue, silos. You're all about breaking down silos. Attorneys are all about keeping silos intact. And that's because once you break down silos, and especially if it's silos that protect information that's identifiable to individuals, you start raising all sorts of legal challenges. And for attorneys, it's like looking at, where's the data coming from? Where's it going to? What's the purpose of data sharing? There are so many different privacy laws, and the list is endless. So the next issue is relationships. You're all about building relationships. Attorneys, not that they're opposed to building relationships, but they're about defining relationships. And that's because how law applies depends on your relationship. Just a real simple example, school-based clinics. Does Ferpa, since I'm talking about Ferpa eventually, does Ferpa apply to a school-based clinic? Answer? Thank you, it depends. It depends who's running the clinic and if they're under the control of the school. In my county, my local health department runs our school-based clinics. They operate independently of our school district. So we may have other laws that apply, like public health laws or HIPAA, but FERPA doesn't apply. So then, finally, is how do you perceive risk? How do attorneys perceive risk? Laws are often contradictory, silent, ambiguous. They require interpretation and professional judgment all the time. So guess where attorneys come down? If in doubt, you say no. Not even it depends, you say no. Because they think of risk in protecting you against liability. They don't see the kind of risk you see. They see risk in sharing data. You see the risk in not sharing data. And the best advice I can give about bringing attorneys on board, we talk about relationships. How about, I don't know if you go as far as saying my attorney is my friend, but at least to have a relationship, an ongoing relationship with your attorney so they understand the context, so they're part of your team. So it's not, can I do something? Of course, the answer is it depends or no, but this is what I want to do. Help me get there. Help me. It may be a matter of how you structure a relationship. So now on to FERPA, if I have any time left. Okay, FERPA basics and its impact on data sharing. Often there are lots of myths and misperceptions about data and data sharing laws. Sometimes data can be shared, sometimes it can't. It's of course, always depends. And so I'll also, in talking about FERPA basics and the data sharing law, talk about opportunities to share data to improve school success consistent with FERPA. Okay, FERPA is a federal statute, and it also has regulations adopted by the Department of Education, U.S. Department of Education. It protects students' education records, grants parents and adult students certain rights, and it applies to schools and educational programs. For example, educational programs would include Head Start, and that's those that receive U.S. Department of Education funds. It limits what schools can share with others, but it doesn't limit what public health or healthcare providers can disclose to schools. Of course, then you've got your whole other layer of laws, but you've got to go through each different law and look at who's doing the sharing with whom, for what purpose, then identify your laws, and then determine what you can do and what you can't do. Okay, education records, that includes anything that pertains to the student, maintained by the school, or somebody acting on behalf of the school. So if you're a contractor to the school, if I'm the public health department, the school can share information with me if we have a contract. I can provide services on behalf of the school, but I'm covered by Ferpa because I'm their agent. I'm acting on their behalf. And so we have school information, including transcripts, disciplinary records, similar records, and also immunization and all the other various medical and health records that schools have. Okay, I somewhat already mentioned this. Does FERPA apply just because services are provided on school premises? No. One of the people, I think it was the Arkansas person, was talking about influenza clinics. If that's a clinic that is held by the health department, it is not under the control of the school district. The health department's there as health department with their health department hat, the same with vision screening and other services, or the school-based services, as I mentioned, then FERPA doesn't apply. And then I'll just mention university student health centers providing services to university students. FERPA applies, it does not apply if it's communications between and among healthcare professionals. It would apply if it's, for example, to provide reporting to a health department. Okay, FERPA does allow disclosure. It allows disclosure of de-identified data, data shared with written consent, or data shared under a FERPA exception. So de-identifying records, whenever you're talking about law and what does it mean to de-identify records, you have to go to every specific law. FERPA has different definition of de-identification than HIPAA does. It has different definition than 42 CFR Part 2 that applies to substance use disorder records. So FERPA talks about removing personal identifiers, then it talks about removing names and addresses, of course, personal characteristics that would make students' identity easily traceable, and other information that would make it easy to identify a student. And then the school has to make the determination, could a reasonable person in the school community who does not have personal knowledge of the relevant circumstances identify the student with reasonable certainty. There are certain statistical de-identification methods or data masking methods that could be used to share meaningful data, but yet to still meet the definition of de-identified. Consent to disclosure, there's been a lot of talk about consent. I am always told, including in the vision, I've been asked, you know, can we do opt-out for certain things? Well, if you're required to have consent under FERPA, no, you can't do opt-out because it requires that you have a written consent in place. It's pretty easy consent. People talked about it. I've seen these little permission slips. Doesn't require a whole lot. HIPAA does require more, but FERPA requires very little, and you can have an electronic consent. Common FERPA exceptions, designated directory information, outsourcing school functions, conducting a study or the health or safety emergency. Sorry about how fast I'm going, but I want to get to the directory information. This is not considered sensitive information, and it includes students' name, address, email, phone number, very important information that, for example, a immunization information system or a local health department might be able to get to update its addresses. So it can let a family know you're overdue for a vaccination. There's some caveats, though. First, the school must tell the parents about directory information, and they have to be allowed a reasonable amount of time to opt out. And if the school allows this to be disclosed or not disclosed, it just depends on what the school policy is. If you want information from school, first thing I advise you to do is go to the school's website, look up their policies and procedures. They're going to list for you what their policies and procedures are on sharing information, including directory information and including the next exception, which is to school officials, and that can be to school officials, meaning individuals within the same school if they have a legitimate need to know the information, but it also can include volunteers or contractors, and again, it's always about needing the information, and the school must cover this in their required annual notice. When you're looking up the policies and procedures on the school website, also look up the annual notice that they give to parents and to see what that allows and what they inform parents of. And then you'll, at least be in a position so that just one quick story. I'm working with a lead exposure, public health lead exposure registry. The registry wanted names and addresses of students because they wanted to contact students' families about the services that are available to the families. The registry submitted a written request under Ferpa. I had already looked up the policy. Things were all go. The attorney said, sorry, can't give it to you under Ferpa. And then we were able to show them their own policy, and then they provided the information. Attorneys are just accustomed to say no, so you always have to know what the policy says in order to advocate. Okay, just mention, a lot of people here have talked about, you can help the school district with its mission. And if you help them with their mission, you can enter an agreement where you can share data. Now, you can't take that data for your own purpose, and you have to have these relationships defined and what happens to the data, how you can use it, but you can do that. Next slide. And the health and safety emergency provision, that'll come up. I'll just give an example, often comes up in the case of communicable disease outbreaks and getting information about who's vaccinated or not. Next slide. Next slide. And then FERPA resources. The U.S. Department of Education has lots of resources, model forms, tutorials on FERPA, everything you can think of. I like the data sharing toolkit for communities, how to leverage community partnerships while protecting student information, because it's written in plain English and can be shared with your community agencies and your data sharing partners. Next one. And that's it. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you, Denise. Kelly.
He told us we had to be really fast, so I don't usually talk this fast.